What would you do if someone you mourned for years suddenly returned, asking for forgiveness? Not in dreams or memories, but in flesh and blood, standing before you with eyes that still knew all your secrets? The last light of day spills through broken windows as Lia adjusts her camera settings. The abandoned textile factory has been empty for decades, its machines silent, its workers long gone. But Lia sees what others miss: beauty in decay, stories in silence. Her finger hovers over the shutter button, waiting for that perfect moment when shadows and light create something magical from something forgotten. Just a little more, she whispers to herself, a habit from years of working alone. The golden hour bathes the dusty interior in amber light, transforming rusted machinery into sculptures of a forgotten era. Lia moves with practiced precision, her camera an extension of herself. Each photograph she takes resurrects something lost, gives voice to abandoned spaces that mirror the hollow places inside her. What she doesn't see is the figure watching from the shadows of the loading dock. A silhouette too still to be casual, too focused to be a stranger. He stands motionless, studying her every movement with the intensity of someone memorizing what they once knew by heart. Lia feels a sudden chill despite the warm evening air. That peculiar sensation of being observed. She turns quickly, camera still raised, but sees only empty doorways and broken windows. The feeling lingers as she packs her equipment, glancing repeatedly over her shoulder. Some instincts never fade, even when the danger that formed them is long buried. Later, as she walks to her car, keys clutched between her fingers, another habit she can't break, she dismisses the feeling as imagination. After all, ghosts don't cast shadows. And Jaxon Rivers has been dead for 8 years, 2 months, and 16 days. The accident report said the car explosion left nothing to bury. Just ashes and memories and questions that would never be answered. Lia had built her life around that absence, learned to breathe around the hole his death had carved in her chest. But some endings are just beginnings in disguise. And sometimes, the dead don't stay buried. Have you ever felt someone's presence even after they were gone? That inexplicable certainty that eyes are watching, that familiar footsteps are just around the corner? Share your experience in the comments below and subscribe to Love Enchanted for more stories that will touch your heart. Because today's story might make you question everything you thought you knew about love, loss, and second chances. Before we begin, this is love from my heart to you. Or maybe, just a small love letter to say thank you. Once upon a time, this channel fell in love. Not with fairy tales, but with the people who believe in them. The ones who cry during the quiet parts. Who pause to feel a heartbeat between the lines. Who still believe that love, even complicated, flawed, impossible love, can be real. Love Enchanted was created for you. The romantic. The hopeful. The heart that's been broken and still dares to open again. So if you're here, you're not just watching a story. You're part of one. Stay with us, for stories that ache, heal, and remind us why love is always worth the risk. She lived in a world of images, capturing beauty others overlooked, while hiding from the pain that defined her past. Lia had mastered the art of framing life through a lens, carefully controlling what was visible and what remained hidden. At 32, she had built a life that looked complete from the outside: respected photographer, dedicated teacher, loving granddaughter. But like her photographs of abandoned places, there was always something missing, something left unsaid. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Lia taught photography at the community center downtown. Her students were mostly teenagers with troubled backgrounds, kids who'd seen too much, too young. She recognized that look in their eyes. The wariness, the walls built high. Photography isn't about capturing what's there, she told them, moving between their workstations. It's about revealing what others miss. The beauty hiding in plain sight. A boy with faded bruises on his arms lowered his camera. What if there's nothing beautiful to find? Lia smiled gently. Then you're not looking closely enough. After class, she drove to her grandmother's modest bungalow on the edge of town. Elena Morales, once vibrant and strong, now moved with careful, measured steps. At 84, her body was failing, but her mind remained sharp as the coastal winds that rattled her windows. "You look tired, Mija," Elena said, studying Lia's face as she unpacked groceries. "Still not sleeping?" "I'm fine, abuela. Just busy with the exhibition." Elena's knowing eyes saw through the lie. 8 years is a long time to carry someone. Lia changed the subject. She'd become expert at deflection, at redirecting conversations away from the void that had swallowed her heart whole. At night, in her small apartment above the bookstore, memories surfaced like photographs developing in chemical baths. Jackson's laugh, deep and unexpected from someone so serious. The way he'd absently trace equations on her skin while they talked. His focus when he listened, as if her words were the only sound in the universe worth hearing. They'd met at a cybersecurity conference where she'd been hired to photograph the event. He'd approached during a break, not to flirt but to question why she'd photographed an empty chair rather than the keynote speaker. "The light was better on the chair," she'd answered, expecting him to laugh or walk away. Instead, he'd studied her with those intense eyes. "You see differently. I like that." 3 days later, he showed up at her small gallery opening. 6 months later, they moved in together. He worked long hours at a tech security firm, sometimes disappearing for days on client emergencies. She'd worried, but trusted. His work was important, he'd explained. People's safety depended on it. "I'll always come back to you," he promised one night, his voice unusually solemn. "No matter what happens, remember that." The memory of those words would haunt her after the call came. "There's been an accident," the detached voice had said. "A car explosion. We need you to identify some personal effects." Not a body, there wasn't enough left. Just his watch, his wallet, a partially melted key ring she'd given him. The funeral was a blur of faces offering condolences she couldn't absorb. She remembered standing at the empty casket, thinking how wrong it was to bury someone without saying a proper goodbye. The investigation concluded it was likely criminal. Jaxon had apparently uncovered something dangerous in his cybersecurity work. The case eventually went cold. Life, relentless and indifferent, moved forward. 8 years had passed, but time doesn't heal all wounds, sometimes it just teaches you to carry them better. Lia had learned to function around the absence, to incorporate grief into her daily routine like taking vitamins or checking the mail. She dated occasionally, briefly, but relationships felt like betrayals to a ghost. Her photography, however, flourished. Critics praised her hauntingly beautiful perspectives on abandoned spaces. They called her work a meditation on absence and memory. They never realized she was simply documenting the landscape of her heart. Which brought her to tonight, the opening of her new exhibition, Remnants. The gallery buzzed with admirers sipping wine and discussing her technique. Lia moved through the crowd in a simple black dress, accepting compliments with practiced smiles that never quite reached her eyes. "The contrast between light and shadow in this series is remarkable," an art critic commented, gesturing toward a photograph of an abandoned lighthouse. "There's such tension between presence and absence." Lia nodded politely. "That's the nature of remnants. They're simultaneously what's left behind and what's missing." As the evening progressed, she felt the familiar sensation of being watched. Different from the casual observation of gallery patrons. More focused, more intimate. She scanned the room, but saw only the usual crowd of art enthusiasts and local supporters. Near the end of the night, the gallery owner approached with a small envelope. "Someone left this for you. Wouldn't give a name." Inside was a single line of handwritten text: "Some ghosts return when it's safe to haunt the living." Lia's hands trembled as she recognized the handwriting, the distinctive way the letters slanted, the pressure points of the pen. Handwriting she'd once known as well as her own. Little did she know, as strangers admired her photographs of abandoned places, someone was watching her, someone who had abandoned her years ago. Someone who, according to death certificates and funeral programs and 8 years of grief, shouldn't exist at all. Rain fell like tears the night her past came back to haunt her. The gallery showing had ended an hour ago, but Lia lingered, organizing prints and avoiding the storm that had descended without warning. When the downpour finally eased to a steady drizzle, she said good night to the gallery owner and stepped into the glistening streets. The city looked different in rain, softer, more forgiving. Streetlights reflected in puddles like fallen stars. Normally, Lia would have stopped to capture these moments, but tonight the note burned in her pocket, its impossible message sending tremors through her carefully constructed world. She pulled her coat tighter and quickened her pace. 3 blocks to her apartment. 2. The sensation of being followed grew stronger with each step. Footsteps behind her matched her rhythm, then paused when she paused. A reflection in a darkened storefront window, a figure too distant to identify but too deliberate to ignore. Lia's heart hammered against her ribs. She fumbled for her phone, keys, anything that might serve as protection against whatever was coming. At the corner near her building, she suddenly turned, prepared to confront her pursuer. The street behind her stood empty. Just rain and shadows and the distant wail of a siren. Exhaling shakily, she hurried to her building's entrance, hands trembling as she unlocked the door. Inside the dimly lit lobby, she pressed the elevator button repeatedly, glancing nervously at the entrance. As the elevator doors opened, a movement outside caught her eye. Someone standing in the rain, watching. Safe inside her apartment, Lia double-locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. She was being paranoid. The note had unsettled her, that's all. Some cruel prank from someone who knew her history. She moved through her evening routine mechanically, changing clothes, making tea, checking her grandmother's medication schedule for tomorrow. Normal actions to counter the abnormal pounding of her heart. She was just setting her mug in the sink when a soft knock came at her door. Lia froze. No one buzzed up. No one knew she was home. Another knock, slightly louder. She approached silently, peered through the peephole, and saw nothing but an empty hallway. Relief flooded her system, until a voice spoke from just beside the door, positioned to avoid being seen. Lia, please. I know you're there. The voice that spoke her name belonged to a ghost. A ghost with Jaxon's voice. Her legs nearly buckled. That voice, deeper perhaps, rougher at the edges, but unmistakably his. The voice that had whispered love against her skin, that had promised forever, that had gone silent 8 years ago. This isn't happening, she whispered, pressing her forehead against the door. I need 5 minutes, the voice continued. Then I'll go if you want. Please, Lia. Her hand moved to the chain as if possessed by someone else's will. The door opened just enough to reveal a face both achingly familiar and disturbingly changed. Jaxon Rivers stood before her. Older, leaner, with new lines etched around his eyes and a scar that hadn't been there before. But those eyes, those were the same. Dark, intense, seeing everything. You're dead, she said flatly, her voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. I had to be. His voice was low, urgent. Can I come in? It's not safe out here. Safe. A bitter laugh escaped her. You've been dead for 8 years. I buried you. I mourned you. And now you're worried about safety. His eyes darted down the hallway. Lia, please. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important. Something in his expression, a desperation she'd never seen before, made her step back. He slipped inside, and she closed the door, keeping her distance as if he were a wild animal that might attack or flee. Under the harsh apartment lights, the changes in him were more pronounced. His hair was shorter, graying at the temples. A jagged scar ran along his jawline. He wore simple, nondescript clothes that seemed designed to avoid attention. But his movements were the same, that contained energy, the way he occupied space as if constantly calculating exits and angles. You look good, he said softly, his eyes taking in every detail of her face. The absurdity of the comment broke something in her. Don't you dare act like this is normal. Like you didn't. Her voice cracked. I identified your personal effects. I planned your funeral. I've lived with your ghost for 8 years. I know. His voice was heavy with regret. I never wanted. What happened? She interrupted, unable to bear his apologies. The truth, Jaxon. All of it. He exhaled slowly. The work I was doing, it wasn't just corporate security. I was tracking a network of hackers targeting government infrastructure. I got too close, uncovered connections to people with serious power. They discovered I was onto them. So you faked your death? Left me to grieve you? The questions came out sharp, cutting. They threatened you, Lia. His voice intensified. They sent me photos of you teaching, shopping, visiting your grandmother. They described the inside of our apartment. They made it clear, either I disappeared or you would. You could have told me. We could have run together. He shook his head. They would have hunted us both. My death had to be convincing, to everyone. Even you. Especially you. Your grief had to be real. The calculated cruelty of it struck her like a physical blow. So you watched me suffer to maintain your cover? I stayed away to keep you alive. His voice cracked. Do you think I wanted this? To hear about your pain secondhand? To see you from a distance and not be able to reach out? You've been watching me? The realization sent a chill through her. Not consistently. It wasn't safe. But occasionally, when I could risk it. I needed to know you were okay. Her body remembered him before her mind could process the betrayal. The familiar scent of him, the particular way he held himself, the cadence of his speech. It all triggered responses she'd thought long buried. Attraction, comfort, safety, emotions that now collided violently with rage and disbelief. Why now? She demanded. After 8 years, why come back? Because it's over. I dismantled the network. The people who threatened you are either dead or in prison. I've been working with federal agents under a protected identity. He took a step toward her, stopping when she flinched. I'm free now, and I had to see you, even if just to explain. Lia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. You expect me to believe you spent 8 years as some kind of undercover operative? That's insane. I know. He reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew a small device. This contains everything, evidence of the network, my work with the feds, all of it. You can verify everything I'm saying. She stared at the offered device but didn't take it. And what exactly do you want from me, Jaxon? Forgiveness. Understanding. For me to welcome you back with open arms. Pain flashed across his face. I want nothing you're not willing to give. He hesitated. I needed you to know I never stopped loving you. That every day away from you was a kind of death. The words hung in the air between them, both plea and confession. Get out, she whispered, tears finally breaking free. Please, just go. He nodded, placing the device on her coffee table. My number's on there. If you're ready to talk more. He moved to the door, paused with his hand on the knob. I'm staying at the Harbor Inn. Room 212. I'll be there for a week. After he left, Lia sank to the floor, her body shaking with sobs that had waited 8 years to be released. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the past and present in equal measure. Would you forgive someone who broke your heart to save your life? Like this video if you believe in second chances, and tell us why in the comments below. Because sometimes, the greatest acts of love look exactly like betrayal. In the days that followed, Lia's world tilted on its axis, familiar landmarks suddenly strange and unreliable. She moved through her routine like a sleepwalker, teaching classes, visiting her grandmother, editing photographs, while her mind circled endlessly around the impossible fact of Jaxon's existence. The device he'd left sat untouched on her coffee table for 3 days. She worked around it, cleaned around it, as if it were a bomb that might detonate if disturbed. On the 4th morning, she finally picked it up, her curiosity overcoming her fear. What she found shattered the last remnants of the life she thought she'd known. Video files. Audio recordings. Classified documents with government seals. Photos of Jaxon with different hair, different names, in different countries. Evidence of a sprawling criminal network that reached into corporations, government agencies, even law enforcement. And throughout it all, the thread of his mission, dismantling the organization piece by careful piece. That afternoon, she texted the number he'd provided. "We need to talk." They met at a quiet cafe 3 towns over, where no one would recognize either of them. Jaxon arrived first, choosing a corner table with a clear view of all entrances. Old habits, she realized. Survival instincts. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing as she approached. The formality between them was a cruel mockery of their former intimacy. "I have questions," she replied, sliding into the seat across from him. "And I need answers. Real ones." For 2 hours, he talked while she listened. His words painted a darker world than she had ever imagined, one where information was the most valuable currency and people were expendable assets. "It started before I met you," he explained, his voice low. "I was recruited out of college to work for a specialized cybersecurity division. We tracked threats, identified vulnerabilities. But I discovered some of my colleagues were selling information to the highest bidders, creating backdoors into critical systems." "And you couldn't just report them?" Lia asked, wrapping her cold fingers around her coffee mug. A bitter smile crossed his face. "To whom?" "The corruption went all the way up the chain. When I gathered evidence, my supervisor, the one person I trusted, was found dead in his apartment. Suicide, they called it." He described how federal agents had approached him afterward, offering protection in exchange for his help infiltrating the network from within. He would become their ghost operative, someone who could move between worlds, gathering intelligence no official agent could access. "Then I met you," he said, his expression softening. "You weren't part of the plan. Falling in love with you was the most honest thing I did during those years. But you still lied to me. Every day. About my work, yes. Never about us." His eyes held hers. "I tried to keep you separate from that world. I thought I could protect you." In another meeting 2 days later, he showed her surveillance photos, pictures of her leaving their old apartment, shopping at the farmer's market, visiting her gallery. Photos taken in the weeks before his death. "They sent these as a warning," he explained, his voice tight with controlled rage. "They described what they would do to you in detail. How they would make it look like an accident. So you died instead," she said quietly. "It was the only way to make them stop watching you. A dead man's girlfriend isn't a threat." He hesitated. "The hardest part was knowing what it would do to you. But I had to choose between hurting you or losing you completely." Lia studied his face, the new lines around his eyes, the scar along his jaw. "How did you get that?" His hand moved unconsciously to the mark. "Extraction gone wrong in Belarus. 2 years ago. And this." She gestured to the gray at his temples. A sad smile. "That's just time, Lia. And stress. And missing you." She wanted to hate him. Wanted to hold onto the anger that had been her companion these past days. But as he spoke of years spent in shadows, of constant vigilance and isolation, she found her rage giving way to something more complicated, a reluctant understanding. "Did you ever consider?" She hesitated. "Did you think about contacting me? Finding a way?" Pain flashed across his features. "Every day. But they were watching for exactly that weakness. The moment I reached out would have put you in danger again." He leaned forward. "I did leave you messages, though. Ways of letting you know I was still out there." "What messages?" "The anonymous donation to your first major exhibition. The rare photography book that arrived on your birthday 3 years ago. The tip about the abandoned lighthouse that became your most famous series." Lia's breath caught. "That was you." He nodded. "Little things. Things that couldn't be traced. Just to be near you somehow." As these revelations unfolded, life continued its relentless forward motion. Lia's grandmother, whose health had been declining for months, took a sudden turn for the worse. A stroke in the night left her unresponsive, her small body dwarfed by hospital machinery. For 3 days, Lia barely left the hospital room, sleeping in a chair beside the bed, holding her grandmother's papery hand. Elena Morales had raised her after her parents' death, had been her anchor through every storm, including Jaxon's loss. The thought of losing her too was unbearable. "Fight, abuela," she whispered against her grandmother's fingers. "Please don't leave me alone." But on the 4th morning, with dawn barely breaking over the horizon, Elena slipped away quietly, her hand growing cool in Lia's grasp. The last tether to her past was gone. The funeral arrangements became a welcome distraction from both grief and the unsettling reality of Jaxon's return. Lia moved through the tasks mechanically, choosing a casket, selecting readings, ordering flowers. She didn't tell Jaxon about her grandmother's passing. What right did he have to that information after all this time? Yet as she stood beside the open grave on a cool, clear morning, surrounded by her grandmother's friends and neighbors, Lia felt the weight of her isolation pressing down like the damp earth waiting to fill the hole. Elena had been her family, her history, her home. Without her, Lia stood untethered, a remnant herself. As they lowered her grandmother into the earth, Lia felt truly alone, until she saw him, standing distant among the gravestones. Jaxon hadn't approached, hadn't intruded on her grief. But he was there, a silent witness to her loss, his presence both unwelcome and strangely comforting. After the service, when the other mourners had drifted away to the reception, Lia remained by the grave. She sensed rather than heard Jaxon approach, his footsteps nearly silent on the grass. "I'm sorry about Elena," he said quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. "She was an extraordinary woman." "How did you know?" Lia asked, not looking up from the fresh mound of earth. "I've been keeping tabs on both of you, making sure you were safe." He hesitated. "I wanted to come to the hospital, but you didn't have the right." Her words weren't accusatory, just stating a fact. "No, I gave up that right when I disappeared." He stood silently for a moment. "She knew, Lia, about me." This made her look up. "What?" 2 years after I died, I contacted her. "I needed someone to watch over you, to alert me if you were ever in danger." She agreed, but only after telling me exactly what she thought of what I'd done to you. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She had quite a vocabulary when she was angry. The revelation should have felt like another betrayal, but instead, it brought a strange comfort. Her grandmother had known. Had kept Jaxon's secret while respecting Lia's grief. Had, in her way, protected them both. "She never said a word," Lia whispered. "I asked her not to. It would have put you at risk." He took a tentative step closer. "She made me promise that when it was safe, I would come back and explain everything to you. That I would try to make amends, even if you sent me away afterward." Lia looked at him fully then, seeing not just the man who had betrayed her, but the boy she had loved, the partner she had lost. The complexity of her feelings toward him defied simple categorization. "I don't know what to do with you," she admitted. "With this. With any of it. You don't have to decide anything now." His voice was gentle. "I just want you to know I'm here. For whatever you need." She had practiced hating him for so long, but hate requires energy she no longer possessed. Standing beside her grandmother's grave, with the weight of the past 8 years pressing down on her, Lia felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first tentative step toward understanding. "I need time," she said finally. He nodded, accepting this without argument. "Time is something I can give you now. I have nothing but time." As they walked away from the cemetery, maintaining a careful distance between them, Lia realized that grief and love were not so different after all. Both changed you irrevocably. Both required you to rebuild yourself around an absence. And both, in their own way, were acts of profound courage. The storm came without warning, much like Jaxon himself. One moment, the sky was a placid autumn blue. The next, dark clouds rolled in from the coast, bringing winds that bent trees and rain that fell in sheets rather than drops. Weather forecasters called it a weather anomaly, a hurricane that had veered unexpectedly northward, intensifying rather than weakening as it moved over cooler waters. 2 weeks had passed since her grandmother's funeral. 2 weeks of cautious, measured conversations with Jaxon, coffee shops, park benches, neutral territories where they could navigate the minefield of their shared history. They established boundaries, created rules of engagement. No touching. No talk of a future. Just truth, unvarnished and complete. Lia had returned to work, finding solace in routine. Her photography students at the community center watched her with concerned eyes, aware of her grandmother's passing but not the resurrection that had preceded it. She channeled her emotional turmoil into her teaching, pushing her students to find beauty in chaos, meaning in disorder. Contrast creates interest, she told them that afternoon, as rain began to patter against the windows. Without shadows, light has no power. By the time class ended, the storm had intensified dramatically. Wind howled around the building's corners, and rain fell with such force it seemed to be trying to break through the glass. Several students called parents for rides. Others huddled in the lobby, watching the deluge with wide eyes. "Ms. Morales, the weather alert says flash flooding possible," said Miguel, one of her most dedicated students, showing her his phone screen. "They're telling people to stay off the roads." Lia checked her own phone, noting the emergency alerts. "Looks like we might be here a while. Let's move to the multipurpose room, it's more comfortable." As the afternoon progressed into evening, parents gradually collected their children, braving the storm in SUVs and trucks. The center's director arranged for staff to leave in groups, sharing the few vehicles with high clearance. By 7 o'clock, only Lia, the janitor, and 2 students remained. "My dad's stuck at the hospital," explained Zoe, a quiet girl whose photography focused on medical equipment, her way of processing her mother's ongoing cancer treatment. "He's working a double shift because other nurses can't get in." "My uncle's coming with his truck," Miguel added. "But he has to drive from the next county." Lia nodded, maintaining a calm she didn't feel. Through the windows, she could see water rising in the parking lot, already covering the lower half of car tires. The community center sat in a slight depression, not officially a flood zone, but definitely vulnerable in extreme conditions. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jaxon. "Are you safe?" She hesitated, then replied, "At the community center with 2 students. Roads flooding." His response came immediately. "Stay there. I'm coming." "Don't be stupid," she texted back. "It's dangerous." "Exactly why I'm coming." The janitor approached, his face grave. "Water's coming in the east entrance. I've put down sandbags, but it's rising fast." Lia's stomach tightened. "How bad?" "Bad enough that we should move to the 2nd floor. Just in case." They relocated to the art classroom upstairs, bringing snacks from the vending machines and bottles of water. Lia kept her voice steady as she explained to the teenagers that this was just a precaution, that help would come soon. She showed them how to use the emergency lighting when the power flickered, then failed completely. Outside, the world had transformed into something primal and threatening. Water coursed down the streets like rivers breaking their banks. The wind bent trees until they seemed to bow in supplication to the storm's fury. In the dim emergency lighting, Lia checked her phone. No service now. The cell towers must be down. An hour passed. 2. The water continued to rise, now visibly seeping under the doors on the 1st floor. The janitor, who had gone to check the building's perimeter, returned soaking wet. "Main roads completely flooded," he reported grimly. "At least 3 feet in some places. We're effectively on an island." Miguel's uncle texted that emergency services had turned him back. No civilian vehicles were being allowed into the flooded areas. Zoe curled into herself, trying to hide her fear. Lia put an arm around the girl's shoulders, offering comfort she didn't feel. "We'll be fine," she assured them. "The building is solid. The water won't reach us up here." But as midnight approached, even that certainty wavered. The water had claimed the entire 1st floor, rising with frightening speed. They could hear it lapping at the bottom of the stairs, a hungry sound in the darkness. Then came a different sound, a rhythmic pounding at the emergency exit that led to the fire escape. The janitor grabbed a flashlight, moving cautiously toward the noise. "Someone's out there," he called. When the door opened, Jaxon stood on the metal landing, drenched and breathing hard. Behind him, a small motorized boat was tethered to the railing. "Coast Guard's evacuating the area," he said without preamble. "Water's still rising. We need to go now." Lia stared at him, taking in his soaked clothes, the determination in his eyes. "How did you even get here?" "I have contacts." His gaze moved past her to the teenagers and the janitor. "Is this everyone?" She nodded, still processing his appearance like an apparition from the storm itself. They moved quickly after that, helping each other down the slippery fire escape into the waiting boat. The water had risen to just a few feet below the second-floor windows, far higher than anyone had anticipated. As they pulled away from the building, Lia saw other rescue boats in the distance, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. Jaxon navigated with the skill of someone who had done this before, guiding them through streets transformed into canals, avoiding submerged obstacles and dangerous currents. He spoke briefly into a radio, confirming their position and destination. "The evacuation center is at the high school on the north side," he explained. "It's on higher ground." But as they turned onto what had been Main Street, a massive surge of water hit them broadside. The boat tilted dangerously, then righted itself, but the engine sputtered and died. Water began seeping in from somewhere beneath them. "We need to find shelter," Jaxon shouted over the storm. "The boat's damaged." Through the curtain of rain, Lia spotted the public library, a solid brick building with a second floor. "There," she pointed. Using paddles stowed under the seats, they maneuvered to the library's side entrance, where a small balcony offered access to the second floor. Jaxon broke a window, helped everyone climb inside, then secured the boat as best he could before joining them. The library was dark and eerily quiet compared to the storm's rage outside. Their flashlights created pools of light that illuminated bookshelves and reading tables. It was dry here, and relatively warm. "You two stay together," Jaxon told the teenagers, handing them a flashlight and emergency blankets from his waterproof pack. "Try to rest if you can. I'll radio our position to the rescue teams." As the janitor helped the kids settle in the children's reading area, Jaxon pulled Lia aside into a long hallway lined with reference books. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "I'm fine," she answered automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, no. I'm terrified. But I couldn't show it in front of the kids." In the dim light of their single flashlight, his face was all shadows and angles. Water dripped from his hair, ran in rivulets down his neck. He looked elemental, as if the storm had shaped itself into human form. "You came for us," she said, the realization hitting her fully. "Through all of this." "I came for you," he corrected quietly. "I always will." Something broke inside her then, a dam holding back 8 years of grief and anger and longing. "Why?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Why now? Why not before? Do you have any idea what it was like? To identify your things? To plan your funeral? To wake up every morning and remember all over again that you were gone?" Her words echoed in the dark hallway, raw and unfiltered. Jaxon didn't flinch from them. "I died too, Lia," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every day without you was its own kind of death. Living in shadows, always looking over my shoulder, never being able to be myself." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him despite his wet clothes. "The only thing that kept me going was knowing you were safe. That my absence was protecting you." "I didn't want protection," she whispered fiercely. "I wanted you. And I wanted a life with you. The one we planned. The house by the coast. Children. Growing old together." His voice broke. "I wanted it so badly, I almost risked everything to come back to you 100 times. But every time I got close, they'd make another move, and I'd know they were still watching. Still waiting for me to make that mistake. Outside, thunder crashed, rattling the windows. The storm's fury seemed to mirror the emotions crackling between them. I'm still so angry with you, she admitted, tears mixing with the rainwater on her face. You should be. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of wet hair from her cheek. I don't expect forgiveness, Lia. I just want you to know the truth. All of it. In that moment, with water seeping beneath the doors and the storm raging outside, they finally spoke truths that had drowned them both for years. How he had watched her from afar, aching with every tear she shed. How she had sometimes sensed him, dismissing it as wishful thinking. How neither of them had ever stopped loving the other, despite time and distance and deception. I thought I was protecting you, he said, his forehead almost touching hers. But I was protecting myself too. From seeing your pain. From having to face what I'd done to you. And now? She asked, her voice barely audible above the rain. Now I'm done hiding. From anything. His eyes held hers in the dim light. Even if you send me away when this is over, I needed you to know that the man who loved you never died. He just got lost for a while. Lia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 8 years shifting inside her. Not disappearing, nothing could erase what had happened, but perhaps rearranging itself into something she could finally carry without breaking. Sometimes we need to be broken open to finally heal. Like bones that must be reset to mend properly, like dams that must breach before new channels can form. In the darkness of that hallway, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of generations bound in books, Lia felt something new taking shape between them. Not the innocent love of their youth, but something tempered by fire and absence, stronger for having been tested. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. Neither do I, he answered honestly. But for the first time in 8 years, I'm not afraid to find out. The waters receded, but something had shifted between them, like tectonic plates realigning after an earthquake. In the days following the flood, as the town began the long process of recovery, Lia and Jaxon existed in a fragile new reality. Not together, not apart, but somewhere in the liminal space between. They had been rescued from the library the morning after the storm, when Coast Guard boats navigated the flooded streets. The teenagers were reunited with their families, the community center was declared structurally damaged, and Lia found herself temporarily displaced from her apartment building, which had suffered significant water damage to its lower floors. Stay at my hotel, Jaxon had offered, immediately adding, I'll get you your own room, of course. She had accepted, too exhausted to find alternatives. For 3 days, they occupied adjacent rooms at the Harbor Inn, taking meals together, helping with relief efforts during the day, and retreating to their separate spaces at night. They talked about safe topics, the recovery work, her photography students, the weather reports. They carefully avoided discussing what had passed between them in the darkened library hallway. On the 4th morning, Lia returned from helping at a distribution center to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a first-class plane ticket to Lisbon, Portugal, dated 2 weeks from that day. No note, no explanation. Just the ticket and a small key. She found Jaxon on the hotel's rooftop terrace, looking out over the town where cleanup crews worked in the streets below. What is this? She asked, holding up the envelope. He turned, his expression carefully neutral. An option. Portugal. I have a small house there. On the coast, north of Lisbon. He gestured to the key. It's yours if you want it. With or without me. Lia stared at him, trying to process his words. You're asking me to leave? To go to Portugal? I'm asking you to consider a fresh start. His eyes held hers steadily. The network I was fighting is dismantled, but there are still people who remember me, who might hold grudges. I can't stay in one place too long, not yet. So you're leaving again. She felt a familiar pain blooming in her chest. I have to. He stepped closer. But this time, I'm asking you to come with me. Or to use the house as your own if you prefer to be alone. Either way, it's your choice. I won't disappear without telling you again. Why Portugal? A small smile touched his lips. You always said you wanted to photograph the old villages along the Atlantic. The light there is unlike anywhere else. That's what you told me once. The fact that he remembered such a small detail from their life before made something catch in her throat. I can't just leave, she protested. My work, my students. The community center will be closed for months for repairs, he reminded her gently. And your apartment building too. You were already talking about finding a new place. He hesitated. I'm not asking for forever, Lia. Just a chance to see if there's anything left to salvage between us. And if not, the house is still yours. Consider it 8 years of back rent for occupying your heart. She left him on the terrace, the ticket and key burning in her pocket like hot coals. For the next week, she turned his offer over in her mind, examining it from every angle. Portugal. A new beginning. With or without him. The freedom of choice was both exhilarating and terrifying. She visited her water-damaged apartment, salvaging what she could. In the back of her closet, in a box she hadn't opened in years, she found a collection of mementos from her life with Jaxon. Concert tickets, dried flowers, photographs. And at the bottom, sealed in a plastic bag to protect it, a letter he had written her the night before he died. With trembling fingers, she opened it, half expecting the ink to have faded like her memories. But the words remained clear, preserved like insects in amber. My Lia, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I can't explain everything, but please know this, every moment with you has been the truest part of my life. When the world made no sense, you were my constant, my true north. I need you to promise me something. Don't stop seeing beauty in forgotten places. Don't stop capturing light where others see only darkness. And please, don't stop living because I couldn't. Whatever happens, remember that love doesn't end. It transforms. It becomes the air we breathe, the light that guides us, the force that shapes us even in absence. I will love you in this life or whatever comes after. Always, Jay. She had never seen this letter before. It must have been hidden in their apartment, meant to be found if he truly died. The realization that he had prepared for that possibility, had thought to leave her with words of comfort, broke something open inside her. That night, in her hotel room, Lia spread her salvaged photographs across the bed. Images of abandoned places she had captured over the years. Factories, houses, amusement parks. Places that had once teemed with life, then been left behind. She had been drawn to them because they reflected her own sense of abandonment. But looking at them now, she saw something different, resilience. Nature reclaiming man-made structures. New life emerging from decay. Beauty persisting despite loss. She picked up her phone and scrolled to recent pictures she'd taken of flood damage around town. Already, there were signs of recovery. Neighbors helping neighbors, children playing in streets being cleared of debris, volunteers distributing supplies. Life continuing, adapting, finding new paths forward. Outside her window, a gentle rain tapped against the glass. Not the destructive deluge of the storm, but a soft, cleansing shower. Lia thought about the ticket to Portugal, about the house by the coast, about the man in the room next door who had once been her entire world. 8 years ago, she had been given no choice. Her life had been derailed without her consent, her future stolen. Now, she was being offered something precious, agency. The power to decide her own path forward. That night, as rain tapped gently against her window, Lia made a choice between the comfort of grief and the risk of love. Between remaining tethered to a past she couldn't change and stepping into an uncertain future. Between the safety of resentment and the vulnerability of forgiveness. She texted Jaxon a single word, yes. Life sometimes offers unexpected second chances when we least expect them. Has someone ever returned to your life and changed everything? Subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss our stories of love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Because the most beautiful chapters often come after we think the story has ended. 6 months later, morning light spilled across a different coastline, painting the terracotta rooftops of Lisbon in shades of gold and amber. From the balcony of their hillside apartment, Lia watched fishing boats return to harbor, their hulls cutting clean lines through water that shimmered like polished silver. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with salt air and the sweet fragrance of bougainvillea climbing the whitewashed walls. Below, the narrow cobblestone streets were coming alive, shopkeepers raising metal shutters, elderly women hanging laundry from wrought iron balconies, children racing to school with backpacks bouncing. The melodic cadence of Portuguese floated upward, still largely incomprehensible to her despite months of lessons, but beautiful in its unfamiliarity. Lia lifted her camera, capturing the play of light on ancient stone, the contrast between shadow and illumination that made this city a photographer's dream. Her work had evolved here, moving beyond abandoned places to focus on transitions, the moment when night becomes day, when tide retreats from shore, when strangers become neighbors. Her photographs had caught the attention of a local gallery, leading to her first international exhibition scheduled for the following month. "You're up early," Jaxon said, stepping onto the balcony with 2 steaming mugs. He handed one to her, their fingers brushing in a casual intimacy that still sometimes surprised her. "The light was too perfect to waste," she replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. He leaned against the railing beside her, close but not crowding. That was their dance now, proximity without pressure, togetherness with space for individual healing. They had arrived in Portugal as tentative companions and were slowly, carefully becoming something more. The transition hadn't been seamless. There were still nights when Lia woke gasping from nightmares where Jaxon disappeared again. Days when the weight of their past pressed down so heavily that conversation became impossible. Moments when the ghost of his betrayal stood between them, solid as a wall. But there were other moments too. Quiet evenings exploring Lisbon's hidden corners, afternoons spent in seaside cafes where they talked until the sun set, mornings like this one where silence felt like comfort rather than distance. They were learning each other again, like reading a beloved book with new pages inserted throughout. The core story remained familiar, his intensity, her perceptiveness, the chemistry that had drawn them together from the beginning, but new chapters had been added during their years apart. Jaxon was more patient now, less driven. Lia was more direct, less willing to leave important things unsaid. "I was thinking we could drive up the coast today," he suggested, watching a seagull wheel overhead. "There's a fishing village about an hour north that still uses traditional methods. Might be good for your Vanishing Trade series." Lia nodded, mentally calculating the angle of light at different times of day. "I'd like that." This was their rhythm now, his knowledge of the region complementing her artistic eye. During their separation, Jaxon had spent nearly a year in Portugal, establishing one of his many safe houses. He knew the hidden beaches, the family-owned restaurants that didn't appear in guidebooks, the best vantage points for Lia's photography. After breakfast, they drove along coastal roads in a vintage Fiat he'd purchased from a retiring professor. Windows down, they breathed in the scent of pine forests meeting ocean, the car's radio playing fado music, Portugal's soulful songs of longing and return that seemed written for their particular story. The fishing village was everything he'd promised, whitewashed buildings cascading down to a crescent harbor, wooden boats painted in faded primary colors, weathered fishermen mending nets by hand as they had for generations. Lia worked silently, moving among them with her camera, while Jaxon conversed in his improving Portuguese, asking permission, explaining her project, sharing jokes that bridged cultural divides. Late afternoon found them on a wooden pier extending into the Atlantic. The day's catch had been unloaded, the fishermen gone home to their families. They sat side by side, legs dangling above water turned golden by the setting sun. "Are you happy here?" Jaxon asked, the question simple but weighted with everything that had brought them to this place. Lia considered before answering, appreciating that he wanted truth, not reassurance. "I'm healing here," she said finally. "And yes, finding happiness in that process." He nodded, understanding the distinction. "That's enough for now. What about you?" she asked, turning to study his profile against the darkening sky. A smile touched his lips. "I'm home for the first time in 8 years. Not because of where we are, but because we're here together." The honesty of his answer warmed her more than the lingering heat of the day. They had promised each other truth above all else. No more secrets, no more protective lies. Sometimes those truths were difficult, but they were always real. As twilight deepened around them, Lia rested her head against his shoulder, a gesture that had become easier with time. His arm came around her, holding her gently. "Next time you decide to fake your death," she said, her tone lightly teasing despite the serious subject, "leave a better note." He laughed, the sound vibrating through his chest against her ear. "Next time, I'll take you with me." "Promise?" she asked, lifting her face to his. "Promise," he answered, sealing the word with a kiss that tasted of salt air and possibility. As stars began to appear above them, pinpricks of light in deepening blue, Lia thought about the journey that had brought them here. The grief, the betrayal, the flood that had washed away pretense, the courage it had taken to board that plane and fly toward an uncertain future. Some love stories don't end with happily ever after. The best ones continue with bravely ever onward. Lia and Jaxon's story wasn't perfect. It was scarred and complicated and still unfolding. But it was theirs, a testament to love's resilience, to the human capacity for forgiveness, to the possibility of building something new from the remnants of what was lost. As darkness fell completely, they walked hand in hand back toward the village, where lights glowed warm in windows and the future waited, unwritten but full of promise. When someone you love disappears from your life, they leave behind a void shaped exactly like them. We carry these absences within us, these negative spaces that define us as surely as the people who once filled them. Lia carried Jaxon's absence for 8 years, letting it mold her art, her relationships, her understanding of love itself. But what happens when that absence suddenly becomes a presence again? When the ghost materializes in flesh and blood, asking for a second chance? Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing to see the whole person, flaws and all, and deciding their complete truth is worth embracing despite the pain they've caused. It's recognizing that people are more than their worst mistakes, more than their greatest betrayals. Jaxon's choice to fake his death was simultaneously an act of profound love and devastating cruelty. Both realities existed together, neither canceling out the other. For Lia, understanding this duality was the first step toward healing. She had to acknowledge that her anger was justified, her grief was real, and yet her love had never truly died. It had simply transformed into something she couldn't recognize. Grief can become a hiding place if we let it. A familiar room where we retreat when the world feels too unpredictable, too threatening. We arrange our memories like furniture, positioning them just so, until our pain becomes comfortable, a place we know how to navigate even in darkness. Lia had furnished her grief with photographs of abandoned places, with careful routines, with the certainty that some things, once lost, can never be reclaimed. But sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to let go of the pain we've made our home. To step outside those carefully constructed walls and risk the uncertainty of healing. When Lia boarded that plane to Portugal, she wasn't just traveling to a new country. She was choosing to inhabit a new emotional landscape, one where forgiveness was possible, where love could exist alongside hurt, where the future remained unwritten. Their story reminds us that second chances rarely come in perfect packages. They arrive messy and complicated, asking more questions than they answer. They require us to be brave in ways we never anticipated, to trust when trust seems foolish, to hope when hope feels dangerous. We all face moments where we must choose between the safety of our scars and the vulnerability of healing. Between holding tight to our justified anger and opening ourselves to the possibility of reconciliation. Between defining ourselves by what we've lost and discovering who we might become. What would you choose if someone you mourned suddenly returned? Would you embrace them or turn away? Would you risk your heart again, knowing it could be broken? Or would you protect yourself at all costs, even if it meant missing the chance to reclaim something precious? These aren't simple questions, and there are no universal answers. But in the space between forgiveness and self-protection, between memory and possibility, we find our most human truths. And perhaps, like Lia and Jaxon, we discover that love's greatest power isn't in perfect happiness, but in its capacity to weather storms, span absences, and begin again, changed but undefeated, in the gentle light of a new day. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like to help others find it too. And don't forget to subscribe to Love Enchanted and hit the notification bell to never miss our stories of love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Because the most beautiful chapters often come after we think the story has ended. Until next time, remember that sometimes the bravest choice isn't moving on, it's opening your heart to begin again.